reach out to her.
Thank you. Gosh, this is 30 minutes past.
¿Pueden enviar el YouTube de el canal? Ya estamos live.
Estamos entrado. Iniciamos.
So Emilia, we will just simply run it 30 minutes late, or do we squeeze the time?
Yes, we will try to squeeze it a bit.
I think they told us we're live.
Yes, we're live, and the link, it is already there if you want to share it with somebody else.
Voy a empezar.
Sí.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to today's launch of the Campaign of Campaigns and the unveiling of the Campaign of Campaigns website, the results of efforts by the Civil Society Group on Financing for Development and the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. We have been experiencing some technical difficulties. Let's just call it in our side of the world, a Monday morning glitch. So thank you all for joining us. We are going to be viewing this on the Women's Working Group YouTube channel. You can just Google it. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Rosa Lizardi. I'm the Global Director of the Feminist Task Force and one of the co-conveners of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. In many ways, this launch today is a culmination of our work this past year, where we have highlighted our work on financing for development and beyond, integrating the added and unexpected crises of a global pandemic, a climate emergency, exacerbating underlying issues of inequality, poverty, gender inequality, unsustainable debt, unfair trade, and an unbalanced global architecture. And in other ways, this is the beginning of our work prior to the new year and taking us into 2021, not only to voice our concerns, but pressing for our demands, harnessing our collective counterpower, using comprehensive analysis to highlight the market failures, and really utilizing our people power to mobilize. So we're very excited to bring you this program. Thank you to all of our partners in this. We're going to have a great, maybe very quickly condensed presentations today to look at our demands, our voices, our concerns. So without further delay, let me introduce my colleague who has worked tirelessly to put this forth, Emilia Reyes, Program Director at Equidad de Género, and also one of the co-conveners of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. Emilia, por favor.
Thank you so much, Rosa, and apologies for the technical inconveniences. We're starting with all of the social media of the Campaign of Campaigns. We hope to fix those very quickly, but nevertheless, we have a very impressive lineup of speakers, and we were hoping to have a series of brief dialogues to discuss. Mainly, one is what are the most pressing issues that their movements are pushing for, and second, how could we all benefit from a more intertwined and engaged collective efforts. So without further I work for international development, but also one of the coordinators of the Financing for Development group, civil society group. And in this capacity as well, he has been a big driver of this campaign of campaigns idea. So welcome, Stefano.
Thank you so much, Emilia and Rosa, for helping to put this together. So I'm going to go straight into a very condensed version of our critical points. But before we do this, unfortunately, I have to say a few words for a very sad event, because as you probably know, many of you have known, we've lost a very close friend and comrade on Saturday, Soren Ambrose, who has been a passionate comrade in the economic justice and social justice campaigning for several decades. I mean, it's really difficult to speak about this for those of us who worked very closely with him. But I've rarely seen the capacity of combining intellectual and political acumen with the extent of passion and still humbleness and friendship and sympathy and solidarity that Soren would always bring to the table. His capacity of, on one hand, seeing clearly our political struggles, but at the same time always having a capacity to laugh over it, and being able to even confront a very complicated journey for a deadly disease in a manner that shows his openness and compassionate attitude, I think was really an example for all of us. So I thought I would spend a few words to remember our close friendship and companionships over the years. And it's really difficult to find the words to celebrate him. But I really hope that as economic justice campaigners, we would find ways to remember him and to celebrate him in the weeks and months to come, together with his wife, Njoki. So it's kind of difficult to move on after this, but let me still try because we're pressed with time. So when we're talking about our demands, I have three major issues that I want to put forward. But before doing so, a short caveat. Of course, the use of the term "our" in the context of the launching of a campaign of campaigns should come with some qualifications. Some of these demands, I think, have been collectively shaped into that space of convergence of economic justice movement that the civil society FFD group represents. But when we're trying to scale up and connect dots and really provide a much broader kaleidoscopic and multicolor connection of different campaigns, I think our demands now, it's our input to our demands, but hopefully we'll be able to connect with different movements in order to forge together a set of broader and deeper and systemic reform calls all together jointly. So I think this is really the spirit of these initiatives, and hope you don't misinterpret the fact of talking about our demands as framing this campaign of campaigns around a pre-established set of ideas. Not at all. This is just ideas that we've been working with, but they represent an input to a collective process. So these demands are largely at three levels. First and foremost, at the micro level, because sometimes we forget about this, and particularly when we campaign globally and work on macro issues. But the micro level remains fundamental. It's a space in which we really need to advance a transformation of our production model. First and foremost, to stop and revert the commodification of essential rights, such as, for instance, starting from food, but also health, education, and much more, and really contrast the continuous privatization of every aspect of life. You know, so that's one fundamental element within the macro sort of micro sphere. But the second aspect is also to recognize that our production model it's fundamentally exploitative. And therefore, we need a new range of regulation that redesigns our production and consumption and marketing systems in manners that would fully respect the centrality of workers and their rights, and reposition wage-based economies versus the current rent-based economies. Secondly, is really confront the unacceptability of leaving social reproduction entirely outside of the current production system, and therefore find a new balance that recognizes production and social reproduction roles within our socio-economic systems. And lastly, of course, the unacceptable ecological and climate footprint that really requires a profound redesign. This means confronting a new wave of regulations that really is able to reshape and redesign the way in which we interpret, business activities and production models. The second level in which our demands focus is at the meso level, where we need to recognize that in the post-colonial world, we have shaped a global division of labors which continues to foster the continued extraction of resources and wealth from the global south. And this has been embodied, of course, by global value chains and many industrial sort of systems that are focusing on primary and commodity dependence within the developing countries. And therefore, the key element of reform is really to shift the barycenter away from the global and really reinvent vibrant and inclusive domestic economies that are based on a new social and ecological pact. And in that respect, food systems might provide an interesting linking pin between feminist, between economic justice, social justice, food justice, and climate and ecological movements. Lastly, at the macro level, it's clear that these transitions, both within the micro and the meso, cannot happen if we do not remove a set of systemic obstacles to transformation that continue to constrain and shrink and reduce the policy of fiscal space of many developing and emerging countries. And in order to do this, we need new economic frameworks, we need new institutions, we need to reclaim the central role of the United Nations and shift the central barycenter away from Bretton Woods institutions, much more in newly forged economic institutions within the United Nations with full participation of all member states and with an open democratic characters. A new global tax body, a new sovereign debt workout institutions, a technology justice mechanism are just some of the kind of institutions that we are calling for. So micro, meso, macro demands for a significant reinvention of our social economic systems. Thank you so much, Emilia and Rosa.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you as well for that very warm homage to Soren. I think this presentation of the Campaign of Campaigns, knowing that he was a great mobilizer in very crucial struggles, is a good way to recognize how we are all interconnected, and our best way to keep on honoring activists as powerful as he was is to keep on the good fight. So thank you, Stefano, and also for starting to recognize the interconnection of all of these different points in the agenda that were drafted by the FFD group at the middle of this year, to start to trying to pose these issues to the decision makers. But we think now these are at the core of the global demands that we all need to mobilize around to. So thank you for this. And I will give now the floor to Ranja to also pose, imposing the same questions. What are the issues you are mobilizing around, and how we can all benefit from a collective effort? The floor is yours, Ranja, from the Third World Network.
Thank you so much, Emilia, and thanks to you, Rosa, and other colleagues who I know put in tremendous effort behind this campaign of campaigns, this whole work on the website and everything else and all the other plans. And we intend to be very much part of this, your effort from Third World Network. So, I want to bring in the trade and investment angle on which I work personally, and also Third World Network has been working on it for more than 30 years now. And we see that the same challenges have remained, and COVID has really exposed us, after so many years of being told that, trade liberalization is great, let the most efficient producer in the world sell to the consumer most cheap. But now we are faced with COVID and we see we have nothing. I mean, we cannot produce the things we need. We cannot produce our medicines, our vaccines, our PPEs, our ventilators. Our health services are in shambles. Our infrastructure is in shambles. We are not allowed to produce the food our farmers are able to produce, because rich countries want to sell their subsidized food to us. So the whole global trade framework, and it's kind of been promoted and pushed through. One is the WTO, which is the multilateral institution, but also a number of bilateral trade agreements, regional trade agreements, investment agreements, and so on. So this whole framework, we see it's simply not working. And I think a crucial thing for us to recognize is that not only has it not helped us deal with a crisis such as COVID, it has actually constrained our government's ability, because the governments have signed away more and more of their policy space by signing these trade agreements. So I know the time is short, let me quickly go to what we have been demanding, from trade groups. And many of you have been part of this, because we've been having this conversation together, right? We brought it to the FFD group, to the women's working group on FFD, and we've been actually fighting this together. Maybe not all of us together all the time, but firstly, we've been asking for that all trade agreements should stop. I mean, it's a very negative demand. We are told it's not constructive, but that's what we feel, because they've simply been bad for us, and more agreements, more and more constraints on our governments, more and more constraints on the people, and higher inequality generated. So we say, stop negotiating any trade or investment agreements. Wait, take stock of your COVID situation. It is telling you that these agreements have not worked. They are actually hindering development, hindering our ability to meet with such crisis, and more crisis will come. So please stop negotiating such trade agreements. Then the counterpart of that is till when and for what, right? So what we say is that we need at the multilateral level a new multilateral institution, in the sense, if it is WTO, then it has to be really work for the people. It has to work for environment. It has to work for development, developing countries. It has to work for our women, our indigenous people, our farmers, our patients. It cannot actually continuously keep discriminating. So we need what Stefano said, we need a new multilateral system, and we definitely need that for trade. We need these bodies to change, and we want agreement. I mean, we are not saying nobody should sign any agreement ever, but the whole underlying principle of the agreements, basically they have been pushed by corporations to benefit corporations sitting in rich countries. That is how these trade agreements, very harsh, very tough negotiations have gone on, and that has to stop. It has to now really change the framework and change who it works for, and it has to work for the ordinary people, because it's very clear what COVID has shown: if everybody does not progress together, everyone will sink together, actually. And I think this huge inequality that has been created also by the trade agreements simply cannot go on. So we are saying a positive framework will be based on, where do we need to become self-sufficient? How do we do some sectors, critical sectors, our health sectors, our food sectors, how do we develop this? How do we keep our policy space for regulation of corporations? That's been a big sacrifice under the trade agreements. The corporations cannot be regulated anymore. And the newer and newer agreements we've gone into, they really take away the regulatory power of our governments. So how do we reclaim that? How do we regulate corporations? How do we base it on development and human rights? And the third big thing, and many of you have been part of it, is the issue of intellectual property rights. You know that when we are faced with COVID, remdesivir, medicines are patented. These vaccines are going to be patented. They are produced, therefore, by only one company, and they are very expensive because these monopoly producers can price them wherever they want. And they have made tremendous profits out of these. So we have been for long calling that, during COVID, if governments actually have to show us something positive, it should be a reform of the whole IPR regime, which allows cheap medicines, vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics to be available to the poorest of the poor in the poorest country of the world. And recently, that we've had such a proposal coming from India, South Africa, and other countries. It's facing a big battle at the WTO because the rich countries are opposing it, because the corporations, of course, they want their IPR monopolies. We ran a very good campaign, and that work still goes on. I think the IPR regime, challenging it, will be a major campaign which will be gainful for us, not just for now, for COVID, but in the future, in the years to come, because it has shown us IPR monopolies, this can be broken. It's not that, powerful a world. We should challenge it. So that is one in terms of a concrete campaign. So one is break down, do not negotiate any more trade agreements, reform the entire global trading system for the people on the ground, and we need a new vision of multilateral trading system. And the third is reform and really kind of dismantle the global IPR system. I will end now, but let me quickly say that for us working on trade, this campaign of campaigns is very important because trade is critically linked to all these other areas that all of us work on together. Trade is critically linked to tax because we are losing such a lot of tariff revenue. Investment agreements do not allow governments to raise domestic taxes the way they want because they'll be sued by the corporations under these investment treaties. We cannot price our medicines the way we want. So patients groups, we cannot grow our own food. We cannot protect our own environment. We are running into debt because also from trade payments, and we cannot, we cannot regulate extractive industries. We cannot benefit our indigenous peoples and provide them livelihoods, secure their land, all because of trade agreements. So trade is really one issue which is extremely interconnected, and only I think a campaign like this, a campaign of campaigns, will make even trade work go forward. I mean, we are lost without a bigger battle, without a bigger campaign, without this big interconnected vision, of what we want for a new world. Trade is part of it, but nothing can advance in trade without this big interconnected campaign. So thank you all again for really launching this, and we are again there. We are with you every step of the way.
Thank you so much, Ranja and Stefano. And I'm going to ask you both very quickly something that is always pressing us. Why macro? And if it sounds so abstract, how is macro so close to us? In what ways? Or why macro at this moment of huge crisis?
Thanks, Emilia. The problem is that what we have seen over the years is that there has been, part of the strategy to build the current global division of labor has been to surrender sovereignty to global institutions that were completely captured by the same countries and the political and economic elite that have been benefited the most from this. And this is what has reduced the policy and fiscal space of countries to actually engage into different development trajectories, exactly as Ranja just explained. So it's very difficult to confront these challenges purely within the local and the national. When you confront these dynamics local and nationally, the river has an energy that is very difficult to contrast. We need to have an upstream regulation of that downstream energy. And that's the only way to do it, is to reclaim the institutions that are ours. And that reclaiming has to do partly by shifting the importance that some institutions have over others. In particular, the regaining of the role of the United Nations in economic governance. Secondly is, of course, to have a completely different approach to how inclusive economic governance policy making actually is. So it's a combination of all of this. But today, retrenching in the local and the national, unfortunately, even if that remains a fundamental locus for struggles, is not sufficient. Because the energy that comes from these systemic drivers of change is too big. So the macro is unfortunately a critical place for struggling. And if we don't actually advance the macro struggle, it's very, very difficult to combat it locally and nationally. It becomes a resistance struggle, which of course will always be there and is the core of all struggles, but it's very difficult to turn that resistance into a positive construction. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, I would totally agree with Stefano. You know, we were holding this meeting with small fishers, small women fishers recently, and they were telling us why would it matter to me? I mean, for me, local work I'm doing, I'm struggling with my life every day. What you do in global trade, why does it matter to me? But that is where the issue is. A woman could get water maybe in her village or in the next village, you know, earlier in Africa or in India, in Asia. Now she has to walk across 10 villages to get that water. And why? The reason is, in her life, she sees, okay, water sources have moved away. I have to now walk 10 villages to get water. But why? It's because some global corporation has come and used investment agreements, has used trade agreements and grabbed water from her village. So now she's forced to walk 10 villages. She will not maybe always realize, but it is our joint responsibility to hold that corporation to account, to hold that global policy to account. So as Stefano said, increasingly policy making of, you know, even local level, even national level is being totally hijacked by global policy making. It is like, you know, pushed by big giant global corporations, and this policy is being superimposed on our countries. So for example, my government cannot decide how to give subsidy to its farmers because the WTO says, no, you are doing something wrong. You are breaking a rule. So global rule has hijacked, and therefore the solution also has to be global. As Stefano said, there are also institutions like the UN, like the human rights spaces within the UN and other spaces where we can look for solutions. So I think while we work on the local and the national, we do need to continuously, it's our joint responsibility to bring in the macro, to bring in the global, because the solutions cannot be found just at local and national level anymore. We really need to see how to work and interlink all these, you know, the policy issues at these different levels together.
Thank you so much. That was very clear. And I just want to share the screen very quickly to show the website of the Campaign of Campaigns, just trying to explain that at this moment in which everyone around is in confinement, these type of virtual spaces have become more relevant. And if someone can help me share the screen now, Adriana, can you share your screen on the Campaign of Campaigns website, so that our intention is not necessarily to be a repository of knowledge, because of those there are greater efforts than ours, but it's really to start making this a point of confluence, a point of in calling for activism. So this is the home. If you scroll down, you will see the main call, based all of these on overarching principles like human rights, gender equality, well-being, etc. You will see all of the overarching principles, and below our demands that are precisely based on these macro points of entry, like international governance of the financial and economic system, the issue of debt cancellation and calling for a debt workout mechanism at the UN, of course, the issue of tax justice and redistribution by means of calling for a tax body, and explicitly addressing illicit financial flows, We also have one demand on technology. Our main point of entry is the Global Technology Assessment Mechanism at the UN, but you will see as well that we're calling for regulation of digitalization, and then you will see a lot of information there. We're calling for, as Ranja was saying, assessing the impacts of trade and investment framework. And we have as well this dimension that we've been talking in other spaces about regulating the financial sector. And if we move beyond, of course, the issue of the PPPs and what are the impacts, the real impacts of PPPs, and why we need to go back to public investment. And finally, the review of the ODA framework. Below, you will find the background documents that are drafted by the FFD group and also the Women's Working Group on financing for development. But if we go back, you will see also that we have a major concern as well on specific issues, like what is happening around these macro demands, but on specific topics like health, food systems, care economy, digitalization. And we also have, we're thinking on going further on the colonial feminist Green New Deal and how to really address financial extractivism, etc. So, but if we go below as well, if we go scroll further down, we also think that it's very important to portray voices on how specific groups are being impacted. We have so far worked, because the people with disabilities has been very active with the FFD group as well as the children and youth. And we think that the agenda posed by indigenous peoples is definitely a macro challenge that we need to highlight. And just wanted to say that this is a live effort. This is by no means finished or ending. Actually, many of the sections are still in construction, but we wanted precisely to launch this without a finished website, because to us, this is about collective engagement. So this is why we have here our speakers coming with us. And I'm gonna give the floor now to Mohamed Ali Lufti from the stakeholder group of persons with disability, so that they can share as well why is the relation of the macro demands in which they've been engaging with their collective struggles, and why also do they see the potential of a collective effort. Mohamed, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend our many congratulations as a stakeholder group of persons with disabilities to this wonderful initiative, the Campaign of Campaigns. And we see it very timely to enhance our global partnership and multilateral collaboration between different stakeholders. To answer your question briefly, I know we don't have much time, but I would like to emphasize 2 points. The relevance of disability rights and inclusion to the overall macro level sustainable development policies, and which we address through the entry point of exclusion and social inequalities. And this is something that the disability movement from the beginning has been striving to, tackle. And because we recognize that the exclusion of persons with disabilities from decision-making, for example, or from development programs and policies, exacerbates and perpetuates the overall experience of exclusion and discrimination and stigma against persons with disabilities in society. This is why the disability movement worked on the launching of this Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities back in 2006, and worked also in collaboration with other stakeholders to ensure that there is a disability language in the Agenda 2030 or Sustainable Development Goals. However, if we need to see where the gap still exists, we need to address some micro issues. And we can see that through the experience of persons with disabilities and their organizations in the overall process of decision-making and development programs and processes. And for example, the International Disability Alliance has launched a survey recently that came out with some very, very explicit results on that on that impact. Just a second. All right, sorry. So one thing that we need to recognize that we are still experiencing as a disability movement, which is hindering our efforts to position ourselves on the macro level in terms of discussing macro policy issues, is that there is still, or despite the increasing presence and participation of organizations of persons with disabilities, we still this kind of like imbalanced representation of many diverse groups within the disability movement, such as persons with intellectual disabilities, persons with of indigenous communities, persons with disabilities of indigenous communities, and so on and so forth, children and youth, and so on and so forth. We see that the participation of persons with disabilities in decision making is still limited. We are not seen as a cross-cutting issue by many policymakers, stakeholders, governments, and many agencies, including the United Nations, despite all of the recognition that we see now. But we are still experiencing that disability is lacking this recognition as a cross-cutting issue. This is also very clear through the level of participation of persons with disabilities in decision-making processes. There are lots of barriers in terms of lacking accessibility, physical accessibility or accessibility of information, the level of attitude or the quality of attitude, the lack of knowledge on how to interact with persons with disabilities, the level of the lack of knowledge on how to address and understand the significance of disability on both micro and macro level issues. And this is also seen through the lack of financing of development in relevance to disability issues, the lack of financing support for organizations of persons with disabilities. You know, organizations of persons with disabilities necessarily experience the same kind of experience that persons with disabilities are encountering in society, which is due to discrimination and exclusion. This is why we see the level of organizations of persons with disabilities participation in decision making is still somehow limited. We need to see more recognition by stakeholders, especially in terms of generating more resources and support for the participation of organizations of persons with disabilities, because this is extremely important for enhancing knowledge, capacity, and enabling organizations of persons with disabilities to be part in decision-making processes. And also, this will ultimately lead to more inclusive policies to be recognized and fulfill the recognition of the sustainable development or the realization of the sustainable development goals on the level of also compliance with the disability language in the CRPD and within the SDGs in terms of promoting the inclusion of persons with disabilities. We see lots of limitations still that exist in terms of the recognition of disability policies through financing for development initiatives. Governments are still not recognizing disability rights as a priority on their national fiscal policies. There is an extreme relevance to problems of tax justice, debt, trade, and they have extreme impact on lives of persons with disabilities and opportunities of inclusion in society by all means. So this is what we see, or how we see the relevance of disability to all this discussion on micro and macro, and also the relevance to other cross-cutting issues such as women, children, youth, indigenous, GLBTQ community, and so on and so forth. I hope I answered your question. I'm here to answer more if you have any. Thank you very much for inviting us on behalf of the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. No, that was very clear. And actually, you really made the point about needing more policy space and fiscal space to address the differentiated needs of all groups of population, and how you have also been making stream efforts to try to tie all of the main points of entry that are really impacting on the well-being of people. I'm going to invite now Shalmali Guttal from Focus on the Global South to also share their experience on the food systems movement and how we can all benefit as well to strengthen their demands, as well as making a better connection between all of these agendas. So Shalmali, go ahead. The floor is yours. Are you having any problem with the video or the mic? Maybe we can unmute you. Shalmali, can you hear us? Shalmali, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry, my connection went off a little bit. Sorry. I should put on my video, I suppose. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yes, your video would be awesome. Thank you, Shalmali, for being with us today.
Yes. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Well, you know, I completely, firstly, I will also thank you and thank Lisa and thank all the people who have put together this campaign. And I think it's a very important space to be in. And I think this space also creates the space to amplify voices and concerns from different regions. So we are coming from India and Asia, and we are extremely appreciative of that. And then before I go into sharing what I had sort of prepared, was I also wanted to, sorry, I just moved my phone away. I also wanted to express my deep sorrow at the loss of Soren, who has been an old friend and for many years, and a fellow marcher and a fellow walker in through so many movements. So thank you, Stefano, for paying the eulogy, presenting the eulogy for Soren, and I join you in that. So I would just like to take this opportunity to draw our attention to a few concerns that are central to our work in Focus on the Global South. Yes, we completely agree and work on all the issues that all the speakers have spoken before. So I won't raise those issues, especially not of trade, investment, and governance and intellectual property rights, and the rights of people with different abilities and from different backgrounds. So, because we of course fully endorse and support those, and also the points that Stefano raised on the importance of the public realm. But given these issues, some of the issues that we are seeing in my organization, Focus on the Global South, that we are now have been mobilizing and fighting for, organizing struggles around for several years now. One is to dismantle the power of transnational corporations and elite businesses. We are seeing an intensification of corporate capture of just about every aspect of our lives, public goods and services, food, water, land, financial services, basically all those things that are necessary to sustain life are being captured by corporations and elite businesses, which then register as corporations one way or another. And here, one of the most dangerous trends in this corporate capture is that of governance, which is governance of policy, regulatory, lawmaking at the national level, but also at the regional and international levels. And at the national level, of course, there are points that were raised. For example, like Ranja raised about why our country, India, does not provide subsidy or support to farmers, or in the Philippines, they're not able to pass certain laws because of the international agreements that have been signed for trade and investment. But another important, very, very important space where that has been become a victim to corporate capture is the United Nations itself. So we are seeing from the time of the Millennium Development Goals, when the World Bank entered the picture, and then moving on, the Sustainable Development Goals that basically give legitimacy to financial corporations and various different types of transnational corporations in the realization of sustainable development. And of course, most recently, the partnership between the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and so on. And, we're seeing this manifesting itself in the way more and more UN agencies are partnering and or collaborating with transnational corporations, in the name of sustainability and in the name of delivering development. But actually, these are, undercutting the space and the genuine multilateralism that the United Nations was created for. I mean, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, just starting to deepen its collaboration with a coalition, a conglomeration, a club of large agrochemical and pesticide corporations, The United Nations Secretary General has announced a UN Food System Summit for next year. And this is more or less a corporate summit because his special envoy for that is, for the summit, is the head of AGRA, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. So this level of corporate capture we find extremely alarming because it sets the global regulatory framework. It sets the global standards. And we see if you were to make a curve, if you were to draw a curve, the curve will move more and more. The new normal is becoming sort of public-private partnership of a new nature, multilateralism of a new nature, where corporations claim to have the same types of rights that people of countries have. They insert themselves in the space between people and governments. So this is of extreme concern to us. Another very important concern, and I will just come to our strategies in a minute, is the deepening of state authoritarianism, which in many countries has taken the shape of fascism, just naked fascism. And, we're seeing here again the convergence of the power of capital and the power of governments. And they are mutually supportive because capital and corporations need governments to run the laws for them, to pass the regulations for them, to enforce regulations that will do their bidding, and governments need money from capital. And so, it's a nice mutually reinforcing relationship for them. But here we're also seeing other things that are happening. We're seeing the subversion of democracy. So in a number of countries, we have extremely autocratic, authoritarian regimes that are building a idea of democracy that is based on very dangerous majoritarianism of particular communities, of particular races, of particular religions. And they are democratically elected, quote unquote, so, they are, so unfortunately, procedural democracy has started to take the place of a genuine space, democratic space, where people can negotiate on a daily or on a regular basis, with elected representatives to build an inclusive, broad democratic societies that are based on human rights and principles of justice. And this is extremely concerning and dangerous. And corporations are feeding into this. Capital is feeding into this. Related to this is the undercutting and the undermining of human rights. The 20th century was a time when we all struggled and so many rights were won. Human rights were won, not only individual, but also collective rights. It was a time when, there was, it was a, more of a multipolar world where Southern governments would fight for a right to development, and from civil society and social movements and unions and workers' organizations, we would support that. It was a time when in the World Trade Organization, as Ranja so well pointed out, we were able to fight intellectual property rights, and we were able to fight the whole issue of trade rules, trumping the rights of workers and the rights of peasants and the rights of women and the rights of indigenous people, the rights of differently abled people, and so on. But those rights have been undercut, and they are being increasingly undercut through both authoritarianism, but also through this, this convergence of capital and state power. So we're seeing, for example, that corporations are supported by hard law. All investment agreements now have what they call ISDS, the Investor-State Dispute Settlement. But what are workers' rights protected by? What are peasants' rights protected by? Now, we do have resolutions like the United Nations DROP, United Nations DRIP. We have, important conventions like CEDAW. We have other, very important human rights instruments and human rights law, that are in place. We have rights to regulate. There are agreements to regulate chemicals and pesticides and wars, but those have been pushed to the back. And powerful governments claiming sovereignty are using laws to protect their own interests, their own perpetuity, and the rights of capital. And we're also seeing at the national level then how this plays out. We have seen criminalization of dissent, which is entirely legal because it's the use of laws to basically arrest and stop any critique of national policy, to prevent heterodox views. Even in the time of COVID, if you look at the emergency powers that states adopted, they didn't use those emergency powers to instead strengthen public health systems and public goods and local food systems and the rights of different communities and constituencies. They used that power instead to go after the media, the press, to suppress right to information. And in many countries in Asia, even those academics or public health professionals or journalists who questioned how COVID was being handled were arrested for spreading fake news and false news, So this is a very dangerous trend that we're seeing, which goes, this concentration of capital and this capture of decision-making and governance. And our response, the way we work in Focus, is a very big important part of our work is to monitor these trends in collaboration, of course, with social movements and different like-minded organizations like all of you who are on this. I have the privilege to share this panel with. Thank you. And the Campaign of Campaigns can be very helpful for us here in terms of amplification of voices. So all of us together, and it's unfortunate Lily cannot be here with us today, but there's a large group of peace, social justice, economic, environmental justice, human rights groups. We're all working together to bring, to bring attention to monitoring what's happening in the world, in the climate issues, in the social issues, the economic issues, and put them on the table and say, okay, how are people of different genders, from different classes, from different constituencies being affected by these? The public needs to know. So the idea of, bringing out people's knowledge is extremely important. So that's a very important part of the work, are the strategies that we're doing. And we do that in collaboration, and we also do what we call popular education, which is basically demystifying the macro level at multiple, at the meso and at the micro level. And at the same time, amplifying the voices of the micro at the grassroots and the meso levels to the global levels. I mean, I cannot tell you how often it has been the case that municipal officials, even national level parliamentarians, will contact any of our organizations to try to understand the implications of a global agreement, or of a trade investment agreement, or of a particular clause. They're there in their seats, having to sign off things, but they don't actually know necessarily what the implications of these will be. So this, this production of people's knowledge and information, and amplifying these voices and making these links from the grassroots to the global level are extremely important. And I know the previous speakers have already pointed that out. So that's one of our strategies. The other strategy, which is very important, is a horizontal strategy.
Shalmali, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah. So it's a horizontal strategy of people coming together. People from different constituencies being able to work together, to join hands and march together, so that we are not divided. You know, we accept that we are communities. We are communities of people in struggle. We're communities of activists at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level. And we cannot allow capital or states or governments to divide us. So I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalmali, for this. And I'm super grateful that you brought the dimension of democracy at a broader level, also the challenges of ultra-nationalistic approaches, as well as the risks that environmental and human rights defenders as a whole are facing in these times. And this is all interconnected. It's not that we have an economic challenge on the one hand, a global on the other, local realities on the other. These are all interconnected, and we need to find these horizontal approaches, as you are saying as well, as much as we are challenging all of these mega processes that are happening as we speak. Thank you so much, Shalmali. And now I'm gonna give the floor to Bridget Burns. She is from a very well-known and dear organization to us, We Do, and she's a great mobilizer as well from the environmental movement and the women's movement. So we want to pose her the same questions that we have been doing to the other panelists about what are the struggles you are making and how being connected can help us maybe finding a better, more successful outcomes in the months to come. So the floor is yours, Bridget.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you to everybody who's already spoken. It's really wonderful to be here this morning or this afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'll try to be brief so we can hear from others as well on this. And I think that where Shalmali ended in terms of this importance, the importance of this space in understanding that we'll only be able to build power when we do so in collective, in a deeply intersectional way. I think that, you and I, Amelia, have spoken a lot about one of what we see as critical for organizing from a feminist perspective is understanding that our work is in collective. And I think another piece of that is understanding intersectionality and that we are fighting multiple forms of oppressions at all times, which also includes having a really deep analysis of the macro, meso, and micro levels, how they interplay with each other, and why we need to build movements and advocacy strategies that are linking to each of those different levels and creating that broader analysis. And I think Ranja and many others have spoken to those direct examples of what that looks like and how the macro meets the micro, and why, unless we do an analysis of both, we really struggle to create change and transformation. And so in terms of what defines our analysis and struggles from a feminist perspective and a ecological and climate justice perspective, in bringing together just earlier this year, our partners from around the world, different regions, different feminist allies who have created global frameworks, feminist frameworks around how to combat ecological and climate injustice. There's many through lines that really resonate with what we've spoken about here, that we are challenging a colonial and neoliberal model of extraction, that we're challenging the privatization of resources. Our colleagues in Fiji from Diva for Equality have a campaign called Women Defend the Commons, which is really about revalorizing what we mean by the public commons, what we share and what we need to protect. There's a framing around the need to ensure a just transition and what that looks like, how it's about creating a feminist, inclusive, regenerative economy, a care-based economy. And I think that in there we see this really revaluing of unpaid domestic and care work, and in that work to shift away from devalue and dismantle extractive industries, fossil fuel infrastructure, disinvestment from privatized exploitative management system of natural resources, and decommodify social services and the public commons, including our land, our air, and our water. And we see a deep need for the creation of fiscal space at national level to be able to invest in social protection. And I think all of this is really encompassed in a whole scale campaign across the different networks that we work in to, in a shorthand, say, divest from harm and invest in care. And in terms of ways in which we, strategies and how we do that is really juxtapositioning what does it mean to invest in harm? Where are these cycles of investment in harm? Whether that's the fossil fuel industry, extractives, fossil fuel subsidies, military spending, or the carceral state as a whole, which is everything from micro-level carcerality to broad-scale military-industrial complex, authoritarian regimes, and really making the case for where flows of finances are inhibiting us from meeting that transformative change that we need. And I think part of this that is both challenging as well as necessary, and what this kind of space can help us to do, is how do we analyze and make sure that we're not so busy fighting for the small piece of the pie that's become accessible to us, that we're losing the bigger picture on the broader macroeconomic problems that are really halting these flows, both of finances as well as that are enabling the corporate capture of our services. And I think that when we work, for example, in the UN climate change negotiations, which is very much a trade negotiation at the end of the day, even though if it makes flags to understanding of social protection, what is actually being negotiated is trade and carbon. And we're very concerned, and the women and gender constituency in that space pays a lot of attention to things like net zero and nature-based solutions, and the new terms and the new forms that come about that for us very much signal not a transformation in our economic systems or in business as usual, but new terminology to allow corporations to continue to profit off of our circumstances and our societies. And I think that Shamali's analysis of that corporate capture is one that seems to cut across all of our different movements and spaces as we work in the multilateral space. I see that the way that we're doing this work manifesting in different collaboratives and collectives. We have a feminist COVID response collective, which has come together with a set of broad scale macro demands that very much support and reflect the demands that the Campaign of Campaigns have reflected from those who work on financing for development. We have collectives working around and analyzing what a feminist Green New Deal would look like. And there's also a lot of frameworks right now looking at feminist peace and feminist foreign policy. And I think part of this is, again, a tool that we're using to ensure that we can really hold particularly global North countries account who make claims that they are themselves leaders on issues such as gender equality or women's rights, when they are trashing the planet, to say so crudely, when they are not taking steps to really challenge and change their economic systems, to de-link gender equality as a siloed issue and link it to our broader systemic issues that we can only achieve gender equality, we can only achieve economic and ecological and climate justice if we really understand the shifts that we need to take at a macro level. And I think that these collectives that we're part of, the power that we're building, and the macro analysis that we are strongly holding on to as we push for change at all levels is a really critical strategy to being actually able to create transformation. And I do hope that this Campaign of Campaigns allows us to build out in a really collective way. So I think I'll leave it at that, Amelia, and pass back to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And you are reminding me that I need to emphasize that we're having a feminist decolonial approach to this Campaign of Campaigns. We're trying to be really radical in the way we also call out the challenges in the way that you have been saying it very clearly, how the powerful governments are using our terminology to actually keep on trashing the well-being of people and the planet. So we need to really call it as it is, as we are also supporting horizontally all of the efforts that are happening also on the ground. So thank you for this, Bridget. And given the time inconveniences, we're also struggling in handling the presentation of the website, but also the time of the speaker. So now I'm gonna give the floor to Baba Aye. He is and we're very grateful for his role in this session. He's coming from Public Services Internationals that have been doing a fantastic work in defending the public services. So, and of course, labor rights. So the floor is yours, Baba. And thank you so much for joining us. You need to unmute your microphone.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Amelia. And thank you to all the panelists. It's a pleasure to be in this discussion. PSI is a global trade union federation, as you pointed out, which brings together some 30 million women and men delivering public services as members of trade unions in 155 countries. And the issues at stake here are very important issues. The PSI shares the values, the views behind each of the 8 points that are listed as demands of the Campaign for Campaigns. And when you look at priorities and perspectives on the COVID-19, which was issued in April, it speaks to this. Our campaigns have been around ensuring, fighting for putting people over profit. Because at the heart of the strengthening of the corporations, at the heart of multi-stakeholderism, is that profits, which is why corporations are in existence anyway, to maximize profit, is now more primary than people and the planet. That is why you see wealth comes before health. That it reflects itself even with regards to the race for a COVID-19 vaccine and the kind of drama we're seeing with IP rights when lives are at stake. You know, you can see how this is very different from what Jonas Salk did when he got the polio vaccine and said, look, this should be free to everybody. But you are having a situation now where people, even when verbally, formally, there are resolutions to sustainable development and all that, profit comes first. That has to change. And this entails arguments, articulation of views and struggle campaigns globally, and as well as other people have pointed out, nationally and locally, and the tying together of these different struggles. That is why for us as PSI, part of the struggle for decommodification has involved remunicipalization. Well over 1,000 bodies in water, in health, that had been privatized. Communities with trade unions and civil society organizations have been able to take this back into public hands. And we have shown practically that the arguments of private sector efficiency is at most a lie. The private sector is not necessarily more efficient. What happens is that resources that could have been used to better provide public services, quality public services, are diverted into private pockets. And the fact also is that several international covenants make a lot of these public services human rights. Health for all by year 2000, water for all. But why is it that despite the wealth, the global wealth, with over 30 trillion US dollars, for example, in tax havens. Why is it that it's not for lack of resources? And I often reflect on, because people often make that relatively correct view that things started to change in the late 70s. Some have described it as the period of the neoliberal counter-revolution. But when you look at it, the post-World War II order emerged for three things, out of three things. One was practical struggle on the ground. There were the hunger marches, there were the sit-ins, mass actions. And two, these mass actions were around a narrative which envisioned a post-capitalist future. I think this was the kind of thing that some 20 years back, it was this spirit that the World Social Forum, the Social Forum process tried to grasp, that another world is possible. And I think part of the challenges for us now is we put together so many trees without at every point in time emphasizing that it is a wood, it is a forest of these trees. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to envision, a more democratic future where quality public services is universally accessible in truth and in deed. With regards to the campaign for campaigns and efforts of working together, I also think there's a need to tie the different threads of our collective working together into a strong, united fabric of collaboration in so many ways. For example, I mean, you have like also the People's Sovereignty Network around the transnational, international, and a number of other bodies. And we all have a common goal, which is challenging the current powers of the corporation, including with their now, because now multi-stakeholderism, which the United Nations Secretary General described as, multilateralism 2.0, has also ensured that, unlike before, where transnational corporations would rather try to lobby their governments to push through their for-profit agenda, now they speak with authority within the United Nations system. So the need for us to be able to bring to bear our collective forces cannot be overemphasized. And for us as PSI, one of our contributions to this is a global online library of struggles and campaign builder, which is open to all. That is the People Over Profit. I mean, peopleoverprof.it website. We think we all have different resources to bring into bear in this struggle, and we should, and with a common vision. Of course, there'll be differences in methods and what have you, but that this current system is not sustainable. If we go along with it, it will result not only in the death of us all, but in the catastrophe for the planet as a whole. And the need to go beyond it should be central to our practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Baba, for really pointing out what are points of convergence of the different efforts of several movements. And of course, you're also very knowledgeable about the struggles of the health community. And I think I'm thinking of organizing another event in January, and perhaps having regular conversations in this under the umbrella of the Campaign of Campaigns. I just wanted to really go back to the website, perhaps before giving the floor to our other speakers, because I wanted to say how we can all work together. So if you can help me share on the screen the website of the Campaign of Campaigns, there is a section called Join Us. So as I was saying, this is a live effort. I'm very grateful for some comments on how we can improve the website. So keep us in the loop about what you're doing and how we can improve it. So the notion of the campaign of campaigns is that it is not a top-down effort. And as I was saying, this is not a repository. It is rather like a confluence of points of entry. And of course, you will have many other points of entry to go through. But our main bet is precisely to try to promote collectively local actions and dialogues, and how to really translate from our different struggles the impact that these macro challenges are having on us. So what we are inviting you is to think about an action, a webinar, perhaps a town hall, perhaps a tweet-a-thon, whatever action you are thinking on, and let us know, contact us with your idea. And of course, you will have to abide by the notion of by the principles of progressivity of rights, gender equality, environmental integrity, and non-discrimination. And after you are sending us your proposal, we will get in touch with you so that we can find also ways in which we can try to translate that effort into this bigger collective and to share it. And so because we're thinking that at the regional level, at the national level, at the local level, all of these abstract challenges are really having a different face, a specific face, are impacting people in a different manner. And we need to also learn and recognize those challenges and the wealth in which they're manifesting their impact. So this is also a way in which we recognize the knowledge, the understanding, the struggle, the messages that people is doing from the bottom up. And that will help us feed the type of work that we're doing at the macro spheres. But also you will see there a section that is called What's Next. It has a calendar of the agendas. If we go to future events, you will see that we're also trying to feed all of the messages to some specific places in which we can do our advocacy. So we will try to update this calendar with the help of your inputs as well, so that we are foreseeing that all of these messages should also try to strengthen the advocacy that we're doing in these spaces. So there are many things going on in this idea, but now I'm going to pass the floor. And I know we have many questions related to trade, to WTO, and how we can address issues of WTO in the UN. We're also receiving questions about, let me see. We are getting a very pertinent comments about how vaccines is the best example on these global demands that are really going to be impacting on the ground. But let us address now, give the floor now to our next speaker. I'm gonna give the floor to Nandini Chami from IT for Change. It's very late for Nandini now, so I'm gonna give the floor to her. And here again, what are the fantastic efforts you're doing in these collective efforts for democratizing the digital sphere, and how we can also benefit from the collective efforts with you. Thank you so much, Nandini.
Thank you, Emilia. I just wanted to say that on behalf of IT for Change, I want to share that we are very glad to be part of this very important initiative, Campaign for Campaigns. And we share all the concerns raised by the colleagues and by the Campaign of Campaigns on the urgent imperative to work towards a new social contract, to counter the economic and social injustice of the current paradigm, and fight for a new international economic order that is fair and just, and the urgent need to address the deficits in global economic governance. And I would just like to talk about two concerns that we would like to bring to the table before all the colleagues in the Campaign of Campaigns about what can inform our joint efforts from our own work at IT for Change. So the first of this is that we think that today the fight against economic and social injustice, this cannot go forward unless we are making this a fight against digital injustice. We see that geopolitical inequality has arisen in the 20 years of digitalization and the transition to the data economic paradigm like never before. 10 countries today own 90% of the patents and 70% of export value gains from the new advanced and frontier technologies of the digital industrial revolution. And of these, US and China are especially powerful, and we all know the statistics that has become quite infamous, I must say, about how the corporations of these two countries, the digital corporations slash platform companies, they own 90% of the market capitalization of the 70 largest digital platforms. And this brings me to my related point that it's becoming evidently clear that the reason for this geopolitical inequality is the data capability gap that is being fueled by the 21st century equivalent of the transnational industrial corporations of the 20th century. And this equivalent is the pan-global intelligent corporation whose entire business model is built on data extractivism. And because of this business model, there are two things that are becoming especially clear. The first is that there is increasingly evident that there is a nexus between the transnational capital flows and transnational data flows. And we see that real economy value chains are increasingly being taken over by these intelligent corporations. In fact, one of these UNIDO reports that I recently read, it was pointing out how after the pandemic, the pace of real economy value chain takeover by transnational corporations has indeed accelerated. If you just look at the flow of capital that has been evidenced by acquisitions into like different countries, for instance, by these big transnational digital corporation giants. And we no longer have any rules right now about the flows of data across borders, and this accentuates and accelerates this capture. The second point that puts us all in a quandary is that just like we always used to be fighting the military industrial complex or the nexus between the authoritarian state and capital that was mentioned by speakers before me as well, you see its new avatar in the form of the network data complex, the unholy alliance between digital corporations and nation states. And this makes us all in a very difficult situation. And this adds to the complexities of the digital injustice battle and the economic and democratic deficits that we have to find. Now I come to my second concern. There is an issue that there is actually a global economic governance deficit that we are all facing. And this is especially compounded by the deficits in the governance of digital questions. And what do I mean by this? I just want to focus on three small aspects now. Speakers before me have spoken about the trade and investment regime and how it accentuates the exploitation of the global south. And we can actually see that new rules that are coming in the form of digital trade rules and this push for the hyper liberalization of cross-border data flows, which are part of these digital trade agreements or digital trade policy proposals that are being pushed, they will actually accentuate these inequalities. We are also seeing that when it comes to global digital cooperation mechanisms, including in the UN, there is this normalization and naturalization of multi-stakeholderism and privatized rule setting. And there's a strange kind of public goods washing, where if you look at initiatives like the WEF for the World Economic Forum's Earth Bank of Codes project, one sees that ostensibly in the name of creating digital and data public goods, there is actually the room that is being paved for global corporate capture of of the economic value of in our times. And this is something that we need to urgently counter. And to come to my final point, I feel that in addressing these concerns, we need two strategies, and these strategies are nothing new, but what we've learned from experiences before us and what has been said here as well. One is that the battle is multi-scalar, and we need strategies that span the global to local level, like all speakers before me have said. And I feel that in fighting digital injustice, this becomes especially important because and at the same time, we have to fight the lack of rules and the lack of space to demand a new global constitutionalism around data flows that is grounded in human rights and the right to development. And on the other hand, at the national level, we also have to struggle for actually ensuring data strategies that can build the solidarity economies that are envisioned by feminists and other progressive groups. And the second point here I want to say is that I think cross-movement alliance building in terms of the struggle for digital justice is particularly important, especially as it's becoming evident through the big tech takeover of all value chains that the struggle for food security, the struggle for trade justice, the struggle for tax justice, the struggle for worker rights, the struggle that feminists have always been fighting. None of these struggles can succeed or go forward unless we tackle the beast that is big tech and, fight against digital injustice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nandini, for this and for reminding us as well that we're not only fighting isolated macro demands, we are in a actually fighting trends like this naturalization of privatization of goods, of flows, of merchandises, of process themselves. So this is very crucial also in realizing, I'm gonna also be very pragmatic and say why we were working towards this campaign of campaigns, because it seems like we're losing on any ground, on every ground, right? On trade, on debt, on tax, on this democratization of the digital sphere, and everywhere. I'm reminded of our colleagues working on the binding treaty of business and human rights, and so we all feel like very isolated, very alone in silos, and fighting a very crucial fight. And we really, this is the time now to realize that not only all of these struggles are interconnected, we need them all to strive, and we need to hold our ground in all of these demands, but also that if we fail in one, then we will see how the rest of them will collapse because of their fragile net in which they're all holding on to. So thank you for reminding us this, Nandini. And now I'm gonna give the floor to our next speaker, Nicole Yanes. She's coming from the Treaty Council and bringing a very much needed voice. I always say now that the demand of the indigenous peoples is definitely a macro agenda because of how they're holding on for the 80% of the biodiversity by only consisting on 5% of the population. They're really holding the ground for ensuring this planet is still kept and alive. So I'd say it is really time that we are also connecting in a deeper sense with the struggles that the indigenous peoples had been leading. So thank you so much, Nicole, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amelia. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Good day. My name is Nicole Maria Yanes. I am from the Opata peoples, currently in Nogales, Arizona, which is a border between Nogales, Arizona, United States, Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. However, it is indigenous land, O'odham, Apache, Yaqui, and Opata lands. It's an honor to be here with all of you representing the International Indian Treaty Council, a long-standing organization who's also part of the coordinating committee of the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, and as well as being program officer for Indian Collective, another indigenous organization. The International Indian Treaty Council has had, since 1974, has been fighting for the recognition of indigenous peoples and for the self-determination and sovereignty of indigenous peoples. And all the presentations that have been done and the work that's being done by Campaign of Campaigns is amazing. There's so much that I was taking notes and wanted to reinforce and connect the work that we're doing. However, because of time, I will be brief. And something that we have done for the last 30 years as an organization, and I know Indigenous peoples also globally have been fighting for the recognition of our inherent rights, right? These rights were not given by any states. They were given to us before there were any of these countries that we're talking about. These are rights that we inherited and that were given to us prior to colonization. So these rights, however, continue to be violated every day, right? And that's why we need to, that's the work that we need to keep pushing, is for our rights to be recognized, our rights to self-determination, economic sovereignty, as we're talking about. There's so many indigenous nations, you know, it's not, that's why the S on peoples, because each sovereign nation has its own government, its own economic development, its own territories and culture and language. And so that's what we have to respect. And that's what we have been demanding at the United Nations, before the League of Nations, what was called the League of Nations, to be respected as sovereign nations and for our lands to be respected. The reason why we continue to be there to uphold the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which took 30 years to get adopted, is because when we're talking about these traits that many of the previous speakers were mentioning, and the traits that continue to go on without our consensus, without our voice, without our participation, our lands, our resources are on the table, and they're talking about our, you know, our resources as they make these agreements without our participation, without our voice. And we need to be in the table. People mentioned women need to be in the table. All of civil society, definitely Indigenous peoples need to be on the table. And that's where we need to continue to join forces. I think we have to recognize that the wealth that has been accumulated, the financial wealth, or that has been accumulated throughout, you know, the last hundreds of years, is off stolen land, is off stolen resources, is off slavery, and it continues to happen to this day. That's why we need the engagement of everybody, and we need change at the government level. And I like what Stefano and others mentioned as well, that it has to happen at the micro level as well as the macro level, right? And we need to address it at the global level. You know, the conversation that we've been having is so important, because what happens at the international arenas affect us at the local level. However, at the local level, we continue to defend our lands and to create sustainable systems, economic systems that work for us, right? Whether that they're based off trade, or sustainable systems that's good for the people, but also for the planet. And that's through upholding those inherent rights that we have, and exercising those rights at the local level, at the tribal level, at the national level is so important. So that we fight at the local level, but we address our rights at the local level. We exercise and implement our rights at the local level, and we have to keep fighting for the recognition and for our rights to be upheld at the international arenas as well. You know, we have the right of free prior informed consent, and that's constantly being violated. And by different countries or states, it's seen as you know, consultation. It's interpreted as consultation, when it is, you know, what we have is free prior informed consent, and that is for every time that our rights are on the table, that our lands, that our territories are in the discussion, we need to be there, and those are our collective rights. And so the work that we have been doing is since, you know, for 500 years back, and we continue to be doing this work. And it's so important that trade and that all these platforms, that campaign of campaigns, and demands that Campaign of Campaigns is doing. I really want to congratulate everybody who's been working so tirelessly. Especially want to honor those that have left before us, that have given their blood, sweat, and tears to this work. And that's the only reason why we're here, right? Because everybody who came before us, and the work that we're doing is for everybody who is coming after us. And we have to keep going. So I really want to honor everybody who came before us. And I just want to leave with, I'm going to close because of time, but I just want to leave with there's so much opportunity for our movements to continue to join, and for our agendas to continue to support each other, so that we achieve what's going to be an equitable world for all people on the planet, and that all of our rights are respected and recognized. And we have to keep pushing for human rights frameworks in all of these agendas, which I know governments really want to leave out a lot of the times. But that's this is the only way. You know, the economy and resources are so important to talk about. We can't leave that out, because that's what continues to enslave our people, right? And we're wealthy in so many ways. However, capitalism has been a big limitation, but we're changing that, and we have to keep changing that at the local, national, and global level. So I just want to leave we have to keep fighting with strength, and we have to keep pushing our agendas forward in unity, and continue to uplift each other, because we have a lot ahead of us. And we saw the impact that capitalization, that neoliberalism has had, just with what the COVID pandemic showed us. And so we have to keep creating sustainable systems at the local level to be ready for what's ahead. And I appreciate the invitation to be here with all of you. And I extend my warm greetings to all of you watching, and to everybody who put this amazing discussion together. And I look forward to what Campaign of Campaigns will continue to lead, and to the website that's going to be launching. Big congratulations. And with that, I close. Thank you.
Nicole, muchas gracias por tanta sabiduría. You were reminding us that the struggles are actually not new. You were going back to the early 20th century, and how you were posing all of these demands. You were reminding us as well how there are plenty of local solutions that can really be applied, and that will have a macro effect as well. So it's not only about how these agendas are impacting us, but also how we can find solutions there as well, and how we really need to keep on having these dialogues to figure out how these local demands can really interact and articulate with the broader asks and solutions that have been posed in that level. So thank you so much, Nicole. And I'm gonna have to say that Lily Nakpil was unable to join us. We very much regret her not being here, but there will be many of opportunities to keep on engaging with her and the amazing DET movement that has been doing so much this year. But now I'm gonna give the floor to Saul. Oh, before that, I just want to mention something in the chat that we were asked how that can we mobilize and engage with all of those movements that are not known or integrated, such as, for instance, this India strikes on the farming bill and many others. I think that this is going to be the greatest challenge that the Campaign of Campaigns is calling for us, all of us together, to solve, right? To figure out, to really recognize that there is plenty of wealth of efforts happening, and we need to find the best ways to interact interact with them. And with this, I'm gonna give the floor to Saul Centeno, who's coming here speaking on behalf of the major group of children and youth, and has been also engaging very much with the FFD group, but really emphasizing how the children and youth struggles echo very much with the progressivity of rights, in recognizing that human rights are not only in this engaged framing, but we really need to think forward. And this is what the children and youth movement has been doing. So Saul, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and thanks to all of the previous speakers. I believe that you have addressed a lot of what we think and what we do, but I just want to highlight a couple of things. And to do this, I want to start by telling you and sharing with you that I was reflecting the other day on the various ways in which humans can commit murder. And you know, there are very different ways, and I was thinking also of writing even an essay on this, but one of the things I realized when reflecting on this is that a lot of the things in the macro level, as you know, pretty much everyone else has already covered, are really close to us, and it can be beneficial or it can be detrimental, and policymakers can and have a lot of different tools to commit murder. And this is very important because, for example, the COVID crisis has exacerbated some of the trends we've seen in terms of unemployment, in terms of privatization of public services, and we also have seen incredibly aggressive austerity measures being implemented all across the globe. And I believe that, you know, all of these trends, you know, we are seeing are in a way a symptom of a larger disease we have and we're facing, and it is that we live and we are perpetuating a world system that is definitely not working. And by perpetuating this world system that has some countries at the core and then some semi-peripheric and some peripheral countries in the back, we are condemning to death and we are committing murder of younger generations, and all of those generations that are to follow, if any, you know. And this is very important to think and to have in mind when creating our agendas. Young people are usually, you know, very interested, and they have a super strong passion on very specific types of activism, you know, ecological, and we fight for inclusion. But we were also discussing a couple of days ago that we are probably, as a humanity, in need, not only from young people, but all of these other collective spaces and collective groups, of a more foreseeing advocacy agenda. We need to start to think what world system can replace the current you know, system that basically makes us and generates as much as problems it can in a very short time if within our history as a humanity. And also that for some reason, we don't exactly understand why, humanity, probably from 200 years to the present, has been conceiving, for example, this idea of exacerbated unlimited growth, and it has created a paradigm in which basically the GDP is the unique and only way to conceive growth. And we believe as young people that human well-being should be the basis of development. It should be the metrics of what we consider as a developed country, as a developed society, and that we should measure well-being as well. Not only the terms of how much money and how much trade happens, and with all of these, side effects it has, but also in which quality of life are we living. And not only the majority, these big privileged majorities in the north world, but also how these minorities are living in the global south. We see very painfully that the global south, the global north is, even having celebrations because they're going to be able to have the COVID vaccine in 2021, but the global south is falling apart. And we still don't know if there are going to be, the resources, the means to acquire vaccines, to implement these programs, and to survive, a pandemic for most people. That's especially young people that are facing unemployment, that are facing as a pause in their education rights, that are facing double to triple journals of labors at home because they are women, and they are, dealing with the pandemic, with the jobs, and a lot of what society imposes to women in developing countries. And it shows what we kind of are worried, and why we believe that addressing macro problems are essential to our daily lives. I was just trying to put everything together in simpler terms. Now, at the MGCY, the Major Group for Children and Youth, we try to bring these daily life issues that we face, that we live, and how these macro trends and macro policies affect us. And we work in 4 different areas with this. We generate policy and advocacy, and we coordinate young people across a number of UN-related development processes and negotiations to facilitate collective engagement. And we believe in the power of collectiveness. We believe in the power of generated consensus, and just to bring our voices and critical voices together. And also we generate capacity building, because especially, these type of financial topics are highly complex, and sometimes, young people are just coming into university or into their graduate studies, and are trying to generate knowledge, but there are things that we have very clear. For example, the climate crisis. We believe that the climate crisis is not the problem itself, but rather a symptom of a larger problem, which is our economical model. And also we generate some action, and we create a space in which other young people and can share and can generate evidence-based for their practices in the local, in the national, in the regional levels. And we try to generate knowledge as well with our capacities, within our means. We provide young people with a platform that somehow encourages them to lead, join, showcase, and share some initiatives and effective actions addressing not only, climate or inclusion or inequality issues, but also these type of financial macroeconomic governance issues that we need to address. So this is what we do. This is what we're worried about. And yes, so we definitely join our colleagues here in this campaign of campaigns, because we believe that no matter what your type of activism is, whether if it is inclusion, whether if it is environmental, financial, all of these macroeconomic policies and trends that are some unfortunately not in their best times, uh, are definitely going to affect you, are definitely going to be cross-cutting, and you need to be conscious of it. So if there's any young people out there, you might want to start following the Campaign of Campaign website, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook accounts, just to keep updated on what everyone in this community is working, speaking, and wishing for our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saul. And I mean, it was very clear with your example as well, how when we're talking about global North and global South, it's not just an abstract concept that people think that they may challenge at time. You're saying how some countries in the global North will actually see it happening, getting access to vaccines, whereas countries in the global South, it's still a question mark, and this is really posing many questions in terms of justice. And I'm gonna say that for like a mistake, a very fortunate mistake, Dereje Alemayehu joined our Zoom where the speakers are. So, and Dereje is in the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. I'm just wondering if Dereje wants to speak for a couple of minutes before we close this. We would be very much privileged in hearing Dereje now that he's doing Zoom bombing in the best sense of the word and the term. And we are very thrilled having you here, Dereje. So if you want to address now in this conversation we're having, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you. I tried to put on my video. Do you hear me?
We hear you, yes.
Yes, the video is off.
Yes, it's off.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to raise 3 points. The first thing is, it's a very, very important initiative, and I congratulate everybody who put in the effort. And my first thinking is, from the points raised today, from the inputs that were made today, and from the ambition itself, I think we need a narrative showing the interlinkage of all these justice movements so that it becomes a narrative of the campaign. And no one would be happier than the tax justice campaign, because it helps us to come out of the silos and see the interconnectedness. It is by showing the interconnectedness that we can also achieve convergence. Just to give you an example, tax revenues are not collected, public revenue gets more, countries then are forced to go to borrowing, and they fall into the debt trap. We have seen in the e-commerce, for example, how much the trade justice movement and the tax fraud issues are interconnected. So it is very important for us to have a collective narrative as well, showing the interlinkage of the different issues we are fighting for. And this is a very huge opportunity for us to come out of the silos and see how interconnected these issues are, and how solidarity and collaboration is necessary to achieve them. The second point I want to raise is, this is a collective platform. It can work only when we also engage in the individual campaigns of each other. If we just say, oh, the people are doing something, it doesn't, it is not part of me, then this collective effort will not work. So we have also to be always attentive and try to echo and participate in the individual campaigns of the different working groups in this campaign. And finally, there is always the concrete struggles are done at country level. It needs an effort, an extra effort, to do the linkage between the local and the global. It is not always self-evident. There was an example Sanya mentioned earlier about the fisherwomen who would say, what have I got to do with WTO? But unless this is clear at that level, we cannot be able to connect the struggles at the global level. So try to develop a collective narrative that justifies and gives the rationale for this joint campaign. Show solidarity not only in this collective effort, but also in participating in the individual campaigns. And the third one is put a lot of effort to link the local and the global the macro and the micro, if it was to be termed that way. So these are really the most important things, and I'm very happy that this initiative has started, and the Global Alliance will be an active participant in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. And these have been great suggestions. I think I'm thinking that we need to have, besides the support for the different efforts, movements, demands, and raising the individual voices at local, national, and regional levels in different languages and stuff, we need to keep on having these collective conversations about strategies. Many of our speakers spoke about strategies, as well as how to face, to map our main challenges and how to really address them point by point. I think this has to be done collectively, and we cannot just remain in the back and just relying on a website. I think that is, as I was saying, that is a point of convergence, not the ending point. And there are many things that we need to do to mobilize. We're talking about something very complex, ambitious, sophisticated, but at the same time realistic in terms of what is needed from us at this moment of extreme urgency. We need to call for something very radical, and I'm seeing that Ranja is also engaging in the question posed by her about the WTO and the UN. She's saying that the same politics of divide and rule plays in every institution. And I'd say this is just a minor example on how we really need to strengthen our efforts. And I would say also to find differentiated strategies for the global north and the global south. What does it mean that you are in the global north and it's not only about this notion of very ancient notion of charity or helping people in the global south? You really need to step up your game, act like a citizen, engaging in your local, national, regional processes, demand accountability from your decision makers, and trying to make a change there in the type of positions they're having, because in the end, they're really impacting the rest of the world. And what is demanded from people in the global south, and in which we are seeing the biggest rate of disapparitions, of murders, and the risk of human rights defenders is on the rise in the global south. So I'd say we really need to have these conversations about how we can best support and enhance the efforts while ensuring the integrity and dignity of everybody doing this fight. And I will join the voices of my colleagues in lamenting the passing of Soren, and I'd say this is one of the best eulogies, as Nandini was saying, or Shali was saying, precisely on how to carry on with these type of legacies that we have of amazing people fighting this fight, who opened the path for us, and now it is up to us to keep on doing it and to do it better. So I'm just gonna have to close here. I'm gonna give the floor to Rosa and perhaps all of our speakers who are still here, and thank you. Maybe you can open up your video to say goodbye. And just for the time being, this has been so exciting, stimulating, inspiring, and I'm so happy that this is just the first starting point of many conversations to come. So Rosa, and if you, all of our speakers can open up your video. Yeah.
Thanks, Emilia. No, I mean, I think you've said it all. We are running short of time. Just to really emphasize that this launch of the website, this website is really just a tool. Those that are going to implement it are all of you. And we need you to take action. We need you to join the campaign, propose your events, propose your actions. En español también únese a esta campaña. Tenemos la campaña también, el sitio virtual en español. Just to say, we also have it in Spanish. So we're very thrilled to have this. And really, it's about the collective power of you all for this collective platform. And just to say thank you very much. I invite all the speakers to turn on their video and let us just say goodbye, all of us in our own languages. Turn on your videos and your mics and we could do a collective goodbye. Thank you. Gracias.
Gracias.
Stay healthy, stay safe, and mobilize. Adiós. Gracias. Hasta luego.
Adios.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Adios.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.
Vegam Kanam. Bye.